It's 2:30 already, so we may start. And the first lecture is on online security at the age of quantum computers. The lecture is delivered by Colonel Marcin Davids from the cyberspace defense component. Thanks for having me. When talking about security, it makes sense to define the notion. When do we feel secure? That's when we don't identify any risks out there. And for network security, it makes sense to reflect on when we feel secure online. How about we do that reflection now as to how we could interpret that security? First of all, when considering security, we should reflect, just like on a slide, that I know who I am transacting with, and that as contrasted to the real world, even though I cannot see that other side physically, I can trust that they are indeed who they say they are, as a person, as an institution, and what is more, that once I'm communicating with another entity, I know what I am doing, what type of a transaction I'm involved in, and that the other party will not be able to negate having been involved in that. I also need to be able to secure information related to the process. That has a broader context too. When talking about information, I need to have control over what I disclose and who I disclose it to. When talking about information, I also need to be able to trust it, to know that the information I use is the information I received, is the information I've generated, and that this is something I can trust. If we continue reflecting on that, these aspects will be provided by cartography. And in order to confirm who is on the other side, we must consider algorithms and authentication measures, confirming the identity of the other party. And for that, we need access control systems, authenticating the information source. And if I need to know where I am transacting with, I need to obtain undeniability. I need to know that the other party is not going to say stuff has not happened, that I received some sort of data. And when we're talking about information protection, we're mostly considering confidentiality. What control am I involved in by using block ciphers? And when talking about integrity, I need to know that I've got control as to the quality of information. I'm going to use shortcuts and digital signatures for that, but also authentication block ciphers. This brief overview shows me that cryptology is going to divide into public key cryptography, that is asymmetric cryptography, and symmetric cryptography. These are very different because in symmetric cryptography, I'm going to use one code. And each party will be able to and will need to get that code, that key, confidentially. But in the other manner, we have both private keys nobody else knows and public keys that are provided to all partners in the transaction. When talking about symmetric vs asymmetric cryptography, why do we even get involved in symmetric one? Well, the advantage of symmetric ciphers is the efficiency. It's usually several orders higher than for asymmetrical. For asymmetrical, what we get is the functionality. And I don't need to distribute the confidential keys. That is difficult in terms of logistics too. Symmetric cryptography allowed us to build the digital society. It's one of its foundations. Without that, it would be difficult to imagine the network as it is these days. Now, how do we obtain the security? When talking about cryptographic algorithms or protocols, or these algorithms being the source of online security, we could also say that these protocols provide information protection. And we've got 4 aspects there. The first and foremost is cryptanalysis. When is an algorithm unbreachable? Well, there is an exploit valid with any algorithm, but its computational complexity is a measure of how difficult it is to exploit it, and that complexity is also a measure of a security level later on. And when we talk about exploits valid with any algorithm, if there are no structural targeted attacks, there are generic attacks that do not depend on the detailed algorithm structure. These general exploits define security level for an algorithm. Is that necessary for us to say that this is an algorithm that was selected appropriately? No, because the generic attack complexity level needs to be adequate too. We need adequate protection levels and trust. Trust is a subjective assessment of whether an algorithm guarantees that protection to us. And this is why this quantitative approach to analysis and how comprehensive it was, how many susceptibilities were identified or analyzed, show us that these do not impact the quality of that algorithm or the efficiency of these exploits. Another aspect that we consider in the context of cryptography and its algorithms is the selection of an adequate key. The algorithm can often adopt various key lengths, and selecting the key length is a compromise between security and algorithm efficiency. The longer the key, the higher the security level, or the more complex any exploits would be. But at the same time, the algorithm execution time is longer, so looking for this compromise is a certain aspect that a security architect always needs to take into account. Another aspect is the key quality. If we want to use a random key, Professor Pawłowski discussed key generation, but we know what key we want to use. It's a binary sequence with 50-50 probability for any bit value. There are some rules for generators. There are also random generators out there and physical sources of randomness. But the last aspect is how the algorithm is used. Is it implemented correctly? Are the procedures abided by both by the designer and the user? And once we know what security depends on, how do we verify it? How do we verify our capability to use a given algorithm? For analysis, we do a literature analysis. We look for vulnerabilities and exploits, or we analyze that ourselves. What is important is for the analysis to be comprehensive. That is carried out by various research teams and peer-reviewed if possible, or reviewed by other independent teams. We want the process to be as transparent as possible. Trust is another aspect. It's a subjective assessment where we test that this analysis was carried out on the level that helps us trust the algorithm. Then we select the key. As to key length selection, we can use various sorts of recommendations. These BSI, ASCII, and so on and so forth, various certification institutions, national or international, and they have specific indications for bit lengths. But there are also models for key length selection. I mean the Lens3 S3VIHO model in particular, where we can calculate the symmetric but key length, but also key length for a key that we're going to use in a RSA or a discrete algorithm. And it says that, for instance, well, we should use this or that key length. The model can also be parameterized and adjusted to suit individual needs, taking the increase in computational power over time into consideration, but also the progress in cryptanalysis. And now for the use. Verification for correct use is through certification or audit processes that help us verify how the algorithm is used in the first place. When talking about security, continuous growth in technology means new risks emerge over time, and in the context of cryptography, what has been discussed over the years is the possibility of quantum computers emerging. Why is that the case? It's because we have algorithms out there, in particular asymmetric algorithms, that help craft much less complex exploits than the generic ones that we've been considering so far. Haven't we known that before? Well, we have. Quantum algorithms have been out there for 30 years. But there has been no quantum computer out there, and perhaps none will come, but the technological progress increased that risk. And given that asymmetric cryptography is so important to us, the risk also changed and is now considered to be serious. Hence, a risk emerged, and so are mitigation measures. We need to develop protection methods that will be effective even if quantum computers are out there that could be used for exploits. Now, how do quantum computers impact cryptography the way it is these days? That is not uniform. In particular, when talking about symmetric algorithms, we've known for long what the impact is gonna be. This protection level can go down, but we know and have known from the outset what needs to be done to overcome that. Extending the key length or the block could be enough, or even if we were to develop a new algorithm, we'd know how to do that. For symmetric algorithms, the situation is slightly different. Today, the most popular algorithms are symmetric algorithms based on factorization or discrete algorithms. These will not provide protection in the context of quantum computer use. For asymmetric algorithms, there are ones out there that are known already and have been known for years that retain their safety level also in the context of quantum computers, but they are not used that universally. They are usually based on key lengths that needs to be extended by a lot. We should also note that quantum computers, just like Professor Dragan said already, must be long enough or large enough to carry out several hundred bits of calculations, and it's also a challenge. Another question emerges as a result. Wouldn't extending the key length be enough? Let me get back to asymmetric algorithms and the key length selection, as well as the models that I've mentioned already. These models don't involve quantum computer use, but if we were to do that, for the Rensselaer-Vejo model, it's the green one, and the red line is for Lenstra model. The red dots are RSA numbers, factorized in a given year, the highest RSA. And the safety margin, that is the distance between the key length estimated by the model and the RSA module. These models are effective, but cannot the keys be made longer? No, because they would have to be extremely long. But for key selection, we've had some tools out there that could help us. So, what other things do we have to offer for the use of crypto mechanisms that could provide us with security? Basically, almost all the proposals out there could be brought down to three types. The first, hybrid solutions, using symmetric algorithms and asymmetric ones together. The symmetric algorithm then would provide additional security for quantum computers, but we'd still need to distribute the key somehow. Even if it's treated as a long-term key, it has to be delivered, handled, and stored securely. The other options, quantum cryptography, or more specifically, quantum key distribution. Let me present the ups and downs of both solutions that we are aware of for today. For quantum key distribution, mathematical evidence is a very important upside. If we assume quantum mechanics to work, we're able to come up with a mathematical proof for the desired security level. We don't have that for asymmetric cryptography. Usually we are not able to present this sort of an evidence. And if we don't have a proof, but we also don't have a proof for the opposite, we are only relying on the assumption that no algorithm like this has been found so far. That cryptography has other advantages though. Key distribution helps us substitute one of the asymmetric parts, that is key alignment. Quantum cryptography will replace all the parts, the key replacement, encapsulation, and so on and so forth. Replacing the current algorithms with new ones, with new solutions, in case of quantum cryptography, requires much more effort. When we're talking about fiber optic connectivity, we need point-to-point direct connections. While these days commercial solutions range up to 100 kilometers, academic solutions up to several 100 kilometers. We need trusted exchange points. If we need to go farther than that, where we transform these keys back to classical key, then back to quantum key again, and send it on. For classical, there are no limitations like that. And this quantum-less algorithm implementation could happen in a manner that is not even noticeable to a regular user.
Now, what are the potential drawbacks? First of all, it's the assessment of an implementation. For quantum distribution of key, it's difficult to separate the analysis from the test on the hardware. Whereas in the other one, you can be sure that you either analyze the algorithm or its implementation. Now, in terms of asymmetrical algorithms, as I said before, when you think about asymmetrical algorithms, what comes to your mind straight away is that you wish to identify certain difficult computational problems. In black, I marked those that are treated as post-quantum issues, and in red, those that are non-post-quantum problems. So you can see here the list of issues that the current cryptography offers as problems that can be used to draft asymmetrical algorithms. So what happened, you might be asking yourselves. Let's go on. In terms of creating new asymmetrical algorithms, well, NIST organized a competition, an open one, similar to SH3, where people from the whole world could submit their suggestions, analyses, and that created some kind of confidence towards these algorithms. The winners and the recommended people are treated as future standards in the United States. And so some algorithms emerged that are accepted both by cryptologists as safe ones, but also by people who are then supposed to implement them. Because this is simply the best thing available right now. 3 algorithms regarding the digital signature were elaborated, one regarding also asymmetrical encryption and key exchange. Oh, by the way, have a look at this table that shows the length of key in bytes, several thousand of bytes. For asymmetrical algorithms that are based on factorization or discrete logarithms, it would be several thousand bits. For curves, elliptical curves, that would be several hundred curves. So that difference is not obvious. Now, was that competition important? Yes, and its results as well. Also, please remember that in the United States, the president signed a new act that stipulates that we should move to post-quantum standards within 1 year time. So in the US, some cryptographic mechanisms are imposed and now will be seen as obligatory to protect information. Now let me go back to the most important conclusions. Are we going to be safe online in the times of quantum computers? Well, if you asked me this today, I would say yes, we will be, because there are far more arguments in favor of that than some years ago. Will that change? Hard to say. Right now, certain algorithms have been suggested as standard ones in the US, but there are more of them. Some of them have been broken and some have not. There are also other competitions in Korea and China, so maybe some new proposals will be offered. Anyway, we will have a pool of algorithms that we can pick them from and use them to protect information. Also, it is possible that quantum technology will provide security on the net. Right now, standardization institutions don't recommend the quantum key distribution. And if someone insists, they say it shouldn't be the only safeguard. However, this may change if you look at the development of the technology and the facilitation of its implementation. And that's it for me. Thank you. Questions? In that case, I would like to ask a question. It's hard for me to believe that you can use a mathematical proof in order to derive algorithms. Well, if you think about unconditional safety, then the only algorithm that has such a proof is the one that has a one-off key. The other things are implicit. We assume that there are no better algorithms. If you think about asymmetrical ciphers, you know that there are some generic algorithms that are now deemed to be the best, with exponential computational distribution. For example, Shor's algorithm that we've known for 30 years, we know it's out there and it can solve the problem of the discrete logarithm efficiently, but no intense research was conducted to find other alternative algorithms. Thank you very much. Now we will hear from Łukasz Dzieszkowski, MSc, from the Military University of Technology, and his speech is entitled Isogenes, Elliptic Curves versus Quantum Computers. Computers.
Okej, wydaje się, że wszystko działa. Dzień dobry.
Hello, my name is Łukasz Dzieszkowski and I work at the Cybernetics faculty of this Military University of Technology. Today I will have the pleasure to tell you more about isogenes, that is the application of elliptical curves as a protection against a quantum computer. I'm glad Colonel took the floor before me because he said many important things that now I will not need to explain anymore. So if I end, then that means maybe I will end sooner. So before I start, I'm wondering how much in depth I should go. So first a question. Has any one of you heard something about elliptical curves? And does that mean you know what they are? Has anyone researched that topic? Not really. Okay, great, thank you. So now I've established your knowledge and now I know what I should say. So this is the agenda of my presentation. I'm going to start with the explanation to those of you who maybe have never encountered elliptical curves. Then I will move on to tell you about the application thereof. I will also tell you about threats that are caused by quantum computers. Then I will move on to isogenes, that is the application of elliptical curves to safeguard ourselves against a quantum computer. In the end, I will sum up my presentation. So what are these elliptical curves? Elliptic curves. You can see here a formula, but I'm sure you won't memorize it that easily. So what are they? They actually are composed of points, and points are solutions of an equation. Here you see the general Weierstrass equation, with some coefficients that are regard a particular body, but that's not that important. And then I will explain why I use that particular equation. So remember that elliptic curves are composed of points that are solutions to this equation, and they have some characteristic properties. Now, the models, which are the ways of representing elliptic curves, there are many of them. I showed you the Weierstrass curve a moment ago, but we also have Hafard's, Hessian's, Montgomery's, and other curves. So there are many of them. They are named after their inventors. I use here the Weierstrass equation because you can use that formula to present any other curve. So this is the most frequently used equation, but sometimes you need shorter formulas. So you also have an abridged version, and it is shown right now on the slide. An example of an elliptic curve. Oh, and by the way, I can see that my presentation does not contain some signs. So here you can see this formula that represents a curve that is about integers. So it contains an infinite number of points. Now, in contrast, in cryptography, we normally use such curves. It's really hard to tell that it's a curve, right? Because you can only see here points. And yet, this is a curve over a body, 1000-221. And you see here over 900 points, 964 to be exact. Why do we use that? I will tell you that in a moment. Now, why do we need these elliptic curves? Colonel mentioned safe communication before. So let's imagine we have two parties to this communication. It's Alicia and Robert, but you also need the third party that is eavesdropping on the messages between Alicia and Robert. Her name is Eva. And these names are not used coincidentally, because in most materials we believe that Alice and Bob are the parties that are in communication, whereas Eva is the third party trying to eavesdrop on that communication. So Eva is listening to that exchange, trying to capture the material that is transmitted. If it's the unclassified text, like for example, post-it notes at school, if your teacher gets them, they can read what's written on the post-it note without any issue. And that's an unclassified case. Therefore, you want to safeguard your transmission in some way. So let's try out the following. Let's say there is Alicia, Bob, and Eva. Alicia has some data that she wishes to send to Bob. That's not the main text of the message. Let's say it's some data. And she is sending the data using an insecure channel. So a third party can access the data, and this is what happens. Then Bob would like to respond. So he also uses that unsecured channel to send some data that Eva can also capture. So Alice and Bob exchanged some data. They own the data, but Eva also has the data. She captured them. So let's go on. Let's imagine Alice and Bob can run some computation based on the data they have, but in such a way that they need to have a key to the transmission. Meaning the parties have the key and they can safeguard their message. This is some secure transmission that Eva can also capture. That means she will see it, but she doesn't have access to the content. So even if Eva has the data, in fact, she can't read the message. So we were able to conduct transmission in an insecure channel in such a way that the third party can't read the encrypted information. That's a challenge, isn't it? So now you might be wondering whether it's possible. And what comes handy is algorithm called ECDH, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. And before I go to the example, let me tell you about some geometric properties of elliptic curves. The first one is negation of points. If you have any points of the curve, you can find an opposite point. This property is important because if you add these two, you will have an infinite point that could be identified with 0. It's a neutral value. The second one is adding points on the curve. Why do you use the curves, the elliptic curves? Because you can add points on them. I guess if at the geometry class at school someone said, so let's add this point to another one, they would probably not get a bad grade at school. And here it turns out that it's possible. Yes, you can add points on such a curve. So if you wish to add the same point twice, you can double it. There is the option to do it. And then if you add p to p, you will end up with 2p. And you can continue in the same manner. Now, knowing that you can add points and that you can double them, we can calculate the point many times. For example, the multiplicity of k. So this leads us to the following conclusion. When we have this multiplicity of a point, we have 2 points, p and q, but we only know that q is a multiple of p. So we will take p, you will calculate it several times, and you will end up with a q. And the problem that we can see here is to calculate the discrete logarithm on the elliptic curve. If you have the q and the p point, that one of them is a multiple of the other one, you actually wouldn't be able to calculate the multiple of a given point. If you know the base p point, you know the end q point, but you don't know what the multiple is actually. Now, an example. So I showed you before 964 points, and this P1 is marked in violet, whereas the Q1 is marked in green. It's 1017824. What these two have in common? That it's the 43rd multiple of P. You can't see that here, right? These points are related. And that's the problem of the discrete logarithm. Having p and q, it's not easy to find out what the multiplicity rate is. So, coming back to our transmission with Alice and Bob. Of course, Eva is still here, still eavesdropping. Imagine, and that doesn't compromise the safety of this algorithm, that you have some data that is in public domain. So you have some standard, and all the parties that know that this is done in a given standard, they know the curve, and they know what is the formula. They know P, which is the properties of the body. So in other words, the set of numbers that we use, we know P, which is the base point, and we know the sequence. So we know how many P points can be generated based on the base value. So first, Alice and Bob generate separate private keys within the group from 2 to -1p. These are their own keys. They won't make them available to anyone else. And then Alice can calculate a multiple of p, so p has to be added several times, and this will be sent to Bob. Obviously, Eva is still there, still listening. Then Bob will calculate the b multiple of p and will send this message to Alice. Alice gets the point, but it also goes to the third party, and this is unclassified transmission. Next step is where both parties can calculate the following. Since Alice got from Robert B times P, and Bob got the same, B times AP, that means they can use their private key. So Alice has to calculate the multiple of BP, and Bob has to calculate B multiple of AP. And there is interchangeable multiplying ongoing. So the conclusion is that both will get the same point, which is A times B multiplied by P. And now, safely, they can send information to each other. And the third party will capture the information, but the question is as follows. If this is secured by a key, then they may have a hard time encrypting it. That's a good question. Could they encrypt the message? Well, this Eva knows the following values, A, P, B, P, but what she needs is the key, which is A times B multiplied by P. Based on that, could she calculate it? That's the question. Well, that won't be an easy task, because what would she need? If she wishes to calculate the key based on AP, she would need to know the private key B. And if she wishes to calculate it based on APP, she would need the A private key. Neither A nor B is known to her. To know it, she would need to solve the problem of the discrete logarithm on elliptic curves. So, just like I showed you on one of the previous slides, knowing the data, she still will not be able to encrypt decipher the message. And this precisely is the ECDH protocol. Elliptic curves are used not only to determine the key, but they are also used to sign messages, which was mentioned by Colonel before. So that means that if someone sends you the information, they can't deny they have sent it. But there is one more application, which is factorization of big numbers. For example, you have different algorithms that will help you factorize big numbers.
Now let me move on to a discussion of threats from quantum computers for elliptic curves. This is a quantum computer by IBM. Here we've got Peter Shaw, that we've heard about today as well, and his algorithm. An algorithm was published by Peter Shaw in 1994 and modified later. Even though at the start it seemed that the algorithm only solves the factorization problem, it actually also allows solving discrete algorithms and discrete algorithms on elliptic curves. And if it does, it's a threat. And if that quantum computer capable of solving these problems were to be built, we would have been able to find A's and B's I told you about quite easily, and that would be a major issue. Luckily, for now, the quantum computer technology does not allow solving problems larger than several bytes. And when talking about our works here on the team, using a quantum annealer, we've solved discrete algorithms on elliptical curves, among others, and the highest result that we managed to obtain using index calculus and Sema-Eva polynomials was 8 bits. These are numbers of up to 256. As you can see, we're able to factorize these numbers or solve for them using paper and pencil. So it's no hazard, no threat to the algorithms used these days. According to official sources, IBM is the market leader in building quantum computers. They've published a development roadmap. They've adopted a scheme going several years into the future, and they managed to meet all the requirements of this scheme up to last year. Namely, they came up with 433 qubits last year. And this year, that is marked in red, the coming up with over 1,000 qubits computer. I checked several days ago, and there have been no releases on that until now, so we don't know if that computer is going to emerge. And in the next stages, it is no longer about developing a single quantum computer, but about building quantum computer clusters, large quantum computers consisting of smaller components. And to come to the day when these algorithms are not going to be safe anymore, we can use algorithms based on other cryptographic problems that the colonel discussed before. These are codes or isogenies on elliptical curves. And now a few words about isogenies. If I were to display what the research papers say, that is all the equations, nobody would want to continue to listen. But isogenies are unidirectional transformations between curves. So we have two curves, and then isogeny is a transformation that brings us from one curve to another one, unidirectionally. If we have three elliptical curves and find transformations from 1 to 2 and from 2 to 3, we can combine them and find an isogeny from curve 1 to curve 3. So an isogeny is a unilateral transformation between curves. And let's see an example. We have E over integers, and we can transform it into another E over integers using these formulas. Here, the issue of isogenies emerges with classical computers. It's very complex and requires a lot of computations to determine these isogenies. We have Jacques Verroux formulas who fathered isogenies, with Moody and Schumer acting as godfathers who have popularized the topic a bit. Their papers are just as well known. Isogenies are transformations, and we can present them as nodes on a graph, with the transformations indicated as graph edges. When talking about algorithms, SID site, B site, C site, O site, and so on and so forth, there are so many of them. Most of them have super singular isogeny Diffie-Hellman in their name. That is the reference to the original algorithm I already discussed. What is important is that neither SID nor psych are used anymore, because mathematical ways have been found to break through what seemed to be secured for dozens of years in just dozens of minutes. However, the SIG algorithm scored as high as 4th round of the NIST competition, and is deemed secure because it's not an easy feat to achieve. So that's what these algorithms work like classically. What about quantum processing of isogeny algorithms? We have a graph, an isogeny graph, and a starting curve E. Let's now determine Alice's path in blue, Bob's path in orange, and the data exchange between users in green. That is in analogy to the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. And let's assume that at each of the two stages, each user is going to determine 3 transformations like this. We're setting out from one curve here. This is transformation 1, transformation 2, and transformation 3. Each user used their keys to get to these points, these nodes on the isogeny graph. And after stage 3, they exchange data, just as it was the case in the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. Then they take another 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. And if the algorithm was implemented correctly, they should have met on the same curve. Let's assume this is the same curve with the J value that can serve as the key agreed between the parties. For benefits of isogeny-based algorithms, we have high security as compared to the key length comparing it to more well-known grade theories. For grades, we need much longer keys. What is the downside of the Alvado algorithms or isogeny-based algorithms is that, as you saw in these formulas, the computational complexity level is very high. In order to improve the efficiency of algorithms, we could seek more effective ways to determine isogenies. Alternative models for elliptic curves are also determined. There are so many models like this. They have not been analyzed in depth. And one model may be faster or better than the other. These attempts are also taken. So it all started with SIG, then we had SIG, B-side, C-side, and these new algorithms are still solved. So to sum up, the existence of quantum computers is there, and quantum computers do solve crypto problems. Through that we managed to solve factorization, discrete algorithms, and discrete algorithms in elliptical curves. However, in the most recent future, the use of algorithms is not going to be at risk because the computational powers of the quantum computers out there do not allow for effective attempts to tackle larger problems. But it makes sense to be secure. We need to have alternatives. And these alternatives require searching isogenies between elliptical curves. Are there any questions? Colonel Plosarz, General Staff. Well, Colonel, you're a young man with probably a long career ahead. So let me ask this question. I'm listening now. And on one hand, we have mathematicians that come up with more and more complex computations, but on the other hand, we have quantum computers that are supposed to be able to break through these computations, but we also have the so-called quantum cryptography, which involves physics. But we're not able to break through that cryptography yet. What's the path forward that is more effective or more optimal? Thanks for asking. For now, if I were to predict, because these are merely predictions rather than knowledge, I believe post-quantum algorithms or symmetrical algorithms are going to be the way forward. Because unless we have a breakthrough in quantum computer technology capable of having a powerful quantum computer on anyone's desk, nothing much is going to happen. But building a quantum computer with these resources and capability to hold many qubits is unattainable for now. So, for now we're focusing on classic computers and their use to secure ourselves. But what we're securing is symmetrical algorithms or quantum algorithms. Oh, thanks so much. But in order to provide a brief perspective, at our staff we're planning in a 235 perspective. On one hand, that's a long time away. On the other, it's much closer. What if we were to come up with 235? Is that moment gone already, or if we discuss quantum communications, do we have to come up with it? Or is that moment still far away? Well, it's difficult to predict for many years on end, but we need to look at smarter people out there. The colonel said earlier that in the US, communication was published about the need to follow NIST standards and grades. If I were to come up with something, I would probably come up with the very same recommendation. Thanks for answering. I'm challenging you a bit because, well, if we look at the smarter ones, let's look at the Chinese. Professor Dragan mentioned communications with the involvement of quantum technologies at space distances. On one hand, looking at the Americans, on the other, looking at the Chinese. They're taking a somewhat different view, aren't they? Let me perhaps comment on this IBM slide. Have you seen a quantum slide telling us that in 2025 they're going to have 1 million optical qubits more stably? No, I have not read a paper like this. Please consider these algorithms. Well, if we were to look at millions, the last paper I saw said that with 20 million of noisy qubits or unstable qubits, we could break RSA algorithms at the 2048-bit version. I heard it was just 17,000 of stable qubits. Well, I would be glad to read it because I'm not aware of that paper. Thanks so much. Now for the next speaker. The interpreter is not getting the sound. Thanks for the introduction. I'm not going to give you an outline of my lecture, but at the start let me mention the general idea for it. The title is How do we use NISC computers to attack asymmetric cryptography algorithms? My objective is to present the relatively recent development, perhaps in the use of quantum calculations in cryptanalysis, cryptography and cybersecurity. I understand that the profile of this conference is more about cybersecurity, but when discussing quantum calculations, I cannot avoid discussing this sort of details. I'll try to do it in quite general terms. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to discuss everything in enough detail though. So, quantum confusion. On one hand, we hear about the quantum register volumes going up. On the other, we hear that the perspective for effective quantum computers is still far away. How do we approach it and how do we measure it? First, we need to realize why quantum computers are a qualitative difference as compared to classical computers in the first place. Let us notice several phenomena and ideas. Quantum superposition tells us that the quantum space may be a combination of multiple other states. We can imagine it or mirror it as the mental attitude of a person taking a decision that is somehow attached to option A or option B. Before they take a decision, they are in a dual state. The next phenomenon is quantum entanglement, which tells us that we are not able to determine the quantum state of a computer I'm going to discuss computational matters rather than physical experiments through a quantum state of some subcomponent. We must take the whole into consideration, otherwise we will not be able to discuss it. These two phenomena convert into operating principles that could separate out two ideas. The first is quantum parallelization. It tells us that whenever we were to combine these amplitudes, then any component or element or qubit, if we impacted these base states, we would encounter parallelization. The next important phenomenon is interference, well known in physics. In this context, it is a situation where changing the state of a qubit, let's say, causes the amplitudes of these various base states to interfere with one another. That was the underlying idea for why quantum computers are different, or what differentiates them from classical computers. Now, coming back to the assessment, we must notice that apart from numbers of qubits, various other characteristics are relevant. Let me point to quantum gate precision. A quantum gate is a digital transformation, an analog to a classical computer that provides a definite, in numerical terms, a definite set of qubits, so that the amplitudes of these base states change. But the gates are prone to error. In particular, if we connect them serially, these errors accumulate. There is also the coherence, that is, time necessary to maintain quantum entanglement. If it's short, our calculations cannot be longer either, or they cannot solve problems that require longer calculations. And then the third thing is the number of qubits. These characteristics are connected because we have logical qubits and physical qubits. Logical qubits have physical representations by physical qubits. That is, when we say a computer has n qubits, we usually comment on the physical ones. This does not convert into logical qubits, though. That's why it makes sense to differentiate between them. And we could read through possible progress in terms of computational capabilities. I painted here the scope of the last 4 years, with the number of qubits having gone up. But if we are to consider these levels, it has not changed that significantly. In blue and red, I have marked a location commenting on what the colonel has said. If the computer is established there, if it is, then the level of error allows us to talk about full-scale quantum computers. In order to further complicate the matters,
let me say that there are two paradigms of quantum computing. That is, you can talk about adiabatic and conditional ones. So the first one you should associate with digital processing, meaning quantum gates have specified, in numerical terms, influence over the change of the state. And here you can see a scheme that is used to reflect it frequently, whereas adiabatic computations are rather like analog type of computation. So you will initiate the computer at a given state, and the dependencies will be corresponding with some computational problem. The state is known. You know the state of minimum energy state. And initially, the computer is at the state of lowest energy. And in this analog fashion, certain dependencies will be reinforced so that the computer can evolve to a state that reflects a computational problem that you're working on. Importantly, if you do it slowly enough, then the computer will not abandon that initial state. This is kind of a picturesque way of presenting that. It's like an attempt to move the hand with a ball slowly enough so that the ball doesn't fall off your hand. But there are some technical implications. Frequently, this time is too long, so it's not practical. And here, just to remind you the algorithms that have been introduced so far, I'm not going to dwell on them too long. You know the Grover's algorithm. So this is the gate paradigm. And people say that it has a proper group or a proper set that has some level of complexity that will change the values, that will transform so that in the end you have a different class of complexity. So Shor's algorithm was mentioned, which is used to factorize complex numbers. And the complexity can be in the area of polynomials. And here is an gate paradigm algorithm. It requires a high level of precision that is right now unachievable. I also listed here two algorithms that I'm going, however, to skip because they are not that important. Now, what is this era of NISQ, which is noisy intermediate scale quantum? This is a state of development where a quantum computer shifts away, by the way, from being just something interesting to being practically and widely used. As said in the beginning, to assess the development condition, we have a problem of precision and credibility and decoherence, as well as the size of register. I would say it's noise to cover all these phenomena. This is the quantum noise. So the current state of development is as follows. Slowly but surely, they are being applied in practice. Even though we don't have any particular accomplishments yet that outperform a quantum computer, and still we see a change in this race. So we are very close to a situation where we will be able to show empirical proof to have evidence that the computations done on a quantum computer cannot be performed by normal computers. Practically we know that, but we still need some theoretical proofs. And so also we will be talking about hybrid algorithms that will combine a quantum and a classical computer. And Also, you could think about the new IBM development plans that we heard more about some time ago. And this approach involves approximation and optimization algorithms. One of the examples that I think could be useful here is the quantum annealing. This method is the transformation of the adiabatic paradigm. That is, what's the probability, you might be wondering? As I said, the adiabatic paradigm allows one to initiate a computer at a given state so that you can check the dependencies whose solution you know in the end. You will evolve this set, this system. And in contrast to the adiabatic one, you can leave that basic state and enter higher energy states. So quantum tunneling and energy dissipation or distribution will make you return to that base state. Practically, that means that quantum annealing is a tool to solve the optimization problem, and you can present it in the form of finding a minimum of that function. Here you see the binary solutions, and here A, B, J. These are real numbers, integers. Remember, please, that quantum annealing will approximate solutions, which means that not always your solution will be accurate.
Nie ma również dowodu na to, że za pomocą wyrażenia kwantowego znajdziemy lepsze rozwiązanie niż na komputerze.
So it's definitely better than on a classical computer, or at least you will be able to find the solution much more quickly than on a classical computer. And for these reasons, and also because of other phenomena emerge, this annealing does not really pay that much attention to the time of the whole process. Remember that the qubits in that case can't be really compared to a gate computer qubits because they are structured based on the hardware. And the number of qubits, well, first of all, it's different, of course, and second of all, it changes in a different way. And this is important when you compare methods. You shouldn't mix these methods. And now I'm moving on to further methods, NISQ, and this is variational quantum solver. And this is a quintessence of the NISQ approach, because here you will use the computational capacity in terms of complexity and the precision of a classical computer. So in the end, you have a hybrid system, and you will start with the Schrödinger's equation to define energy. This symbol means kind of transformation of the quantum state. This is a vector, in fact. So this transformation determines how quickly energy changes in the system. So if you formally solve this equation, you'll end up with this transformation, which is a unitary one, meaning it can be carried out as a circuit, as a quantum circuit. Hence, you get the answer to the question about the energy level of any given system, that is a quantum computer. And this, by the way, is the matrix that represents this transformation. Based on these assumptions, you can determine 3 steps in the algorithm. And what are they? First, you initiate a quantum state that has some vectors, some parameters. And then you will measure the expected value. And this value, with this value, you will use classical optimization algorithms to determine another theta value. And for some problems, one may prove that it will be coming close to the minimum value. You can't prove that in general. That's why this method, at least right now, we can't say what the complexity level is. However, it has a big advantage, meaning you can use a computer with a small number of qubits to come up with solutions that could outperform classical computers even now as we speak. The QAOA algorithm is another algorithm using the same method that solves the optimization problem, which you could formulate in this way, where Z is a vector and C and I are both functions. Now, what is the similarity? At the first sight, it's clear. So you will initiate a quantum state that is dependent on the theta parameter. However, these parameters should be broken down to two values that go down to two transformations that are carried out at this state. Also, you need the energy value and optimization of parameters on a classical computer. Now, what is the difference? The difference is as follows. That is, you want to break these down into two separate transformations in the second case. So this transformation A is because of the purpose, and the other one has to do with the selection of the initial state. Now, without delving much more in detail, let me underline one thing. The transformation A is related to interference, quantum interference, whereas B with parallelization. Combining these two phenomena will give you very promising opportunities. However, we can't prove them in practice yet. The difference between QOAOA is that you're using here a different sign, special diacritic sign. This VQE method has been used to solve great problems. Like if you have different vectors, then the lattice, you can have the lattice problem. So you will come up with a lattice, like the one you can see here. And you can see here that they can have very different distribution on the lattice. These transformations can be either easy or difficult. And the vectors of that lattice may have this defined Euclidean standard norm. And then you can introduce the SVP, the special shortcut vector problem. You need to find the shortest vectors knowing the base value. And this is by far not that easy to do. And it has been demonstrated that this can be then transformed into Hamiltonian's form. Proper heuristics and number theory facts were applied to determine how many states were occupied, and also proper emulation of quantum computations was applied to show how efficient VQR could be for these lattice problems. In short, these are the results. N equals 28, that's the largest size. The occupancy rate was determined with this formulation, and in the end about 1,600 qubits were used. So it doesn't mention complexity, of course. It's a heuristic. And now a word of commentary. This emulation outperforms alternatives, even though it hasn't been carried out physically on hardware yet. If you think about occupancy in point 2, it's quite close to other algorithms. It's very similar. Other known algorithms, I should say. Importantly, if you use the same number of qubits, you have a higher level of noise that will be accepted. For larger problems, if they are higher than 180, then it's more difficult to find any method. For quantum computers, there would be too high a noise. You can see here convergence. So, in other words, complexity of the method is still not defined because of the reasons that I explained. But maybe, in short, we will be able to do it because there is this tolerance for noise. Now, another method is a hybrid one, which is the low-resource hybrid factorization method, which is based on refactorization, which is one of the algorithms that is very frequently applied. And here you want to come up with a relation between the two squares. It's a general number field sieve. This method could be described in four steps. First you have the base value, then you will check the relations, and moving on you will see linear algebraic steps, and then the end cumulation. However, there are some limitations to this method. The sieving process doesn't need to be that precise, in fact. That's why the idea assumes that this can be done as quantum computing. This idea goes back to a compromise between the occupancy of qubits, that is high for Shor's algorithm, and a complexity that is characteristic of a general number field sieve. And if you could transform it to a quantum circuit, you will have symbols for individual elements that are interesting to you. Now, Shor's algorithm, as we know, can refactorize, and it will kind of break down the numbers that we are sieving into small indicators. Once you've done that, you can use the Grover's algorithm so that in the end you can close the sieving process. This approach changes the complexity in the following way. Have a look. It looks identically, but there is a difference here. This indicator is different, and it's quite important. It's a big difference in terms of complexity. Now, occupancy rate is also different than in the case of Shor's algorithm. And here you see also the latest results from this year, actually, showing that Shor's algorithm could be improved to have fewer gates. This can lead to more shallow circuits and changes in the occupancy rate. So this is about the classical solutions. Right now, this is only possible theoretically.
And that's what we've got. Quantum weighting in 3 options: for factorization, for discrete algorithms, for logarithms, and for discrete logarithms on elliptical curves that give us the following occupancy of resources. These are the largest for the elliptical curve option. And give us these 2 experimental results: 21 bits for factorization, 106 for discrete logarithm in a finite body, and 3 bits for discrete logarithm in a set of points on the elliptical curve. But we could also use cryptography-like problems. For instance, for factorization of a 2048-bit number, we need about 1 million of qubits. For discrete logarithms in finite bodies, 130,000 and some 50 million for discrete logarithms on elliptical curves. Now, summing up, for further directions to be perceived for these NISQ class computers, it may be QA and QAOE and low resource method, or facilitations that have recently been published for occupancy, for resource consumption, or other sub-exponential methods combined with QAOA. And to finally conclude, the 3 most important points I'd like you to remember as follows. Even though we're getting quite large registers for these quantum computers, their capabilities are still quite limited. The NISQ attitude means we're not waiting for fully credible computations, but rather we use an optimization-based hybrid attitude and refine the existing sub-exponential methods. This means some gaps in their assessment will require practical knowledge and experience to provide evidence of their efficacy. Thanks so much. Thank you. Are there any questions? Feel free to. And the last speaker for today, talking about quantum technologies, is Captain Elżbieta Burek, PhD from the Military Academy, who will discuss D-wave quantum computers as a tool for algebraic attacks on block ciphers. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me present the results of quantum annealing applied to block algorithms. This is research conducted mainly in cooperation with Mr. Wroński, PhD. NIST presented a report on post-quantum cryptography with a question, a controversial and complex question of when a large-scale quantum computer is going to be built. Providing smooth and safe migration from current crypto systems to their quantum equivalents will require a lot of effort, and regardless of whether we are able to estimate when these large-scale quantum computers are to come, we need to already be preparing our information systems to be resistant to these attacks. As contrasted to symmetric cryptography, the report observed that the quantum impact is not going to be drastic because Grover algorithm provides square level speed increase, meaning you just need to double the key to ensure security. That recommendation does not include the possibility of more refined quantum attacks. While inspecting various paths for growth, the report admitted that special purpose quantum computers such as quantum annealers have already been conceptually developed, such as D-Wave, but due to their specialized character, they seem not to be significant for crypto analysis. And the motivation for this research was specifically the continuous progress in terms of quantum computers and the resources that exist out there, as well as an attempt to have quantum computers as non-relevant for crypto analysis and attempts to use the wave for a specialized crypto exploit that should be taken into account when designing ciphers. Resolving these issues is performed this way. First, an optimization problem needs to be formulated that would be acceptable by a D-Wave. You can use BQM, DQM, or CQM models. The DQM also includes the strings and QBO problems, and as our problems involve binary variables, we choose QBO, which is defined as follows. So we have a Qij matrix, n times n dimensions with real number elements, and we need to find an assignation of binary values to n xij variables defined by the following function. The second step is to transform the problem into Ising's problem. This is done by the D-Wave system, as the Ising's problem is the native problem for this system. Then we have a conversion to a graph as discussed by Dr. Wronski. For dense problems, chains are established with a single logical variable represented by a certain number of qubits, all returning the same value. The so-called weight scaling is carried out to scopes acceptable by physical chips, that is the values from -2 to +2 for nodes and -1 to +1 for edges. Then server configuration is carried out, setting up at least the annealing time and computation time. And just like the previous speaker said, the complexity of problem solution by D-Wave is not determined yet and requires further research. Heuristic assessments have been carried out that indicate that the time for solving the QBO problem consisting of n binary variables is OE to square root of n. The idea for a possible exploit is an algebraic method by presenting the cipher as a set of equations and then solving that set. A transformation from polynomial equation set down to a QBO model takes the following steps. Let's assume we have a cipher described by the set of polynomial equations, and the problem is to find a vector of binary variables that would solve for this set. The first step is to transform the equations to pseudo-Boolean functions that give us polynomials with integral coefficients. The next step is to linearize these pseudo-Boolean functions. So we chose the Rosenberg method that gives us a new binary variable for each square polynomial and establishes penalties to reject wrong solutions, because the solution is correct, the penalty is 0. If it's not, it's a positive value. The next step is to present the K multiplicity by additional binary variables. To that end, it is assumed that all the binary variables for a given polynomial are 1, while the others take their maximum values. And the last step is to define the rest square sum, and then cubo is the sum of square rests minus a constant c. In general, we have two methods out there for the transformation. We can either use linearization or squaring. Why did we adopt linearization? In transformation with squaring, first the square rests are determined, and then the equation is reduced down to a square equation. And as the are polynomial values, the variables can take negative values, and then the penalties are meant to ensure to reject the wrong solutions. The weights should be double the positive value of all squares, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of uninomials with which are quite significant, meaning that the coefficients for the penalty polynomial are going to be much higher than with the primary problem, meaning that the coefficients for the primary problem may become significant. However, with linearization, the sequence means that we are always getting a non-negative value for the solutions, so the penalties are also enough to be non-negative, even though linearization is NP difficult for these functions in general. In our specific case, this is going to be a polynomial problem. And based on the solution experiments of solving these problems using the D-Wave computer and the transformation method presented herein, we've come up with a cipher that will allow us for the obtaining of the smallest cubo problem possible. And due to the physical structure of the chip integrated in D-Wave, the algebraic structure, the equations are generated to should be selected so that the matrix of the cubo problem is non-dense, meaning there are the fewest chains possible, and the penalty weight needs to be assigned so that the difference between the minimum and the maximum in the matrix is as low as possible. Also, considering the transformation to the cubo problem means that the number of the square polynomials is the lowest possible, which will reduce the cost of linearization, and also additional equations should be minimized, which will also minimize the Ki. And the first cipher we analyzed was an SP cipher. The equations were generated on a binary body, and in order to obtain square equations between the linear and nonlinear layer, intermediaries have been defined by binary variables. Then the binary version could be presented by 128 equations, and the nonlinear by 16 square equations. The co-authors showed how to describe that setup using an IS box, so giving us a set of square equations, quadratic equations. Transforming that to cubo requires 299 additional variables. Well, for the whole nonlinear layer, that's 4,784. The question emerged of whether all these equations, quadratic equations, are required to define the substitution box, and that's a problem of finding an adequate problem to find this, to derive this box with all the necessary square equations to define the box, providing additional binary variables for the transformation to cubo gives us a minimum solution with a set consisting of as few quadratic polynomials as possible, and mostly very short equations, just a few longer ones. All right, when does this set define the substitution box? For any input whatsoever, we can build a table consisting of polynomial values for each output, then each of these tables has one and only one column that has only zeros. That's the output from the substitution box. And then if out of all 39 equations we select a subset of polynomials, and in each of 256 tables like this for the ASA box, we only have one column comprising zeros only that will match the permutation defining this box, then this is the very set defining the substitution box for the cipher. We analyzed all setups of 14 equations in total mostly, and we found 251 sets and 2 millions I'm sorry, 1052 equations for 12 equations, over 2 million for 13 equations, and 227 million for 14 equations. In order to find an effective set of equations for all these, several methods have been proposed. The first one comprises two stages. First, the sets we found already in the table have been pre-prepared and only selected those that had the fewest square polynomials. We had 268 with 12, 667 for 13, and 3 for 14, with 54 quadratic uninomials each. Then we checked if one of the equations can be replaced with another one with fewer uninomials. That is a result of XOR operations on a certain number of other equations in the set, yielding a set that initially had 378 uninomials and 268. After the reduction, its transformation to the Cuba problem reduced the number of variables from 109 down to 106. Another method offered was to present the space of solutions by a graph with nodes representing the vectors these polynomials comprised, and other nodes showing the equation sets that emerged after XORing a certain number of equations. The XOR was defined as multiplying the vector by a reversible binary matrix. In order to provide an effective multiplication, RFSRs have been used, operating so that the state is continuously multiplied by the same reversible binary matrix, and we're moving on from a state to a state to another state. For reversibility of the set, we took a number of binary values, and for the direction represented by red dots, we took a variance of the number of uninomials in the equations of the set. In addition, to extend the scope of search, the initial set was multiplied many times by a random binary matrix in order to set out from a different point on the graph. As a result, we found 3 sets that required 105 variables for the transformation to a Cuba problem. Now, for every AS version, the size of the Cuba problem was determined. First, to use the super-determined set comprising all these 139 equations. Then for the effective set found later. And we compared the results. Well, these results were published a few days before our first paper. That is, finding an effective set allowed us to arrive at a Cuba problem that was some 58% smaller than the super-defined one. For each of the AS cipher variants, a number was determined for which the exploit is less complex than the full search exploit, but even the half number of rounds was not exploitable. So we generated a small problem for a small AS problem of 200 elements. That is the structure of the max matrix sent to D-wave. In blue, we can see the coefficients, and it's a non-dense matrix. The annealing time was set to 20 minutes, and this approach gave a correct response. The second cipher analyzed was In ARX1, the operations on the cipher are performed on n-bit words. The non-linear operation was adding modulo to env, and the linear operations XORs going right and left. The equations were generated on the integer ring, but for the spec cipher we focused on the directionality of operations, because according to the commutation, first a rotation to the right is carried out, then the addition modulo 2 to nth power, and then the bit XOR operation. As the bit XOR requires strictly defined bits as an input, then this means that the modulo 2 to nth power addition would have to be carried out using the transferred bits.
So every bit of the sum will be represented by a polynomial, and this will be 2n. So the whole processing path on the left of one round could be written down as 2n plus 1 equation. The cost of linearization per the smaller spec cipher one is the one that you can see right now here. So the cost is too high. That's why we moved the scope of the round, and we introduced some intermediate states so that the bit XOR operation is carried out first, and only then adding operation 2 to n. And then the left path can be written down as a square equation, and the right one as the third degree. And then your linearization cost is only 4n. And for all the variants of spec, we determined the problems, and then we came up with the number of rounds for which the attack could be of smaller complexity than a full search one. And for the highest version, spec, we attacked in 34 rounds. That is the better result than the best classical one. Also, on my version of spec, we were able to generate a problem with a 16-bit key that was over a circle. You can see here the matrix density is 34%, so it's higher. And it took over 20 minutes to solve it. So within the 20 minutes was not enough. The solution was wrong. That's why another problem was generated. And then the spec was over a binary body. The matrix was less dense. And then the problem was solved. So the density was 6.7%. So with this, let me sum up. A transformation model of the system of equations describing a block cipher for an optimization problem in the form of QUBO is presented, making it possible to use a D-wave quantum computer for algebraic attacks. The form of the effective system of equations describing the block cipher that makes it possible to obtain the smallest possible optimization problem is now defined. Effective circuits were found for selected types of block ciphers, and the size of the QUBO problem was determined for them. A system of quadratic equations was found explicitly defining the base case of the AES cipher, which allows reducing the target QUBO problem by about 58% compared to the use of an overdetermined system. The resulting QUBO problem sizes for the AES standard are about 70% smaller than those published so far. Assuming the computational complexity of solving the QUBO problem using quantum annealing equal to it, the best result was achieved for the SPEC 128/256 cipher, for which this attack can be effective for 32 out of 34 rounds, which is far better than a classical attack. That's it from me. Thank you. Do we have any questions to our dear speaker? Yes, we do. I have several ones, to be honest. The first one is the following. I read an article this year at Quantum Journal. Of course, I forgot the authors. Anyway, I found there a comment that in the case of quantum algebraic attacks, we shouldn't expect a better result than in the case of Grover. Could you comment on that? Well, this assumption is involved in the so-called black box model, where we are not using a structure. So NIST said that it's not about those refined, sophisticated attacks with a cipher structure. So the case that you're working on shouldn't be, this shouldn't be applied to it. Yes, it's not this model, it's the other one. One more question. People frequently consider talking about reinforcing symmetric algorithms, some modifications of extension of the key. In your case, this key extension model was a conventional one, or did you do anything more? Was that maybe irreversible? Well, I'm not sure where you're driving at, but well, let's take you have a round. You have these rounds of algorithm, and then you need to extend the key so that in every round you have the sub-key introduced, correct? The sub-key generation. Yes, we took that into account. Right, my question is, was that a standard function that is reversible based on a shift, or well, the algorithm of generation is in line with the documentation of each cipher. Okay, so these were standard solutions. Yes, the problems that I showed you were used not only just based on the ciphering algorithm, but also it's about the key. Right, I'm asking because looking at algebraic attacks, one of the options to reinforce symmetrical block algorithms looking at quantum cryptanalysis is by introducing some modification. Yes, prolongation of the key, and then, but then it's much more difficult, right? It's based on the shortcut function, and then you will have far more equations. No, we haven't took that into account. Okay, thank you. And this is off the microphone. I know, but if you wish to take additional 512, well, I'm not talking about 512. It's not only about increasing the size of the block, right? This is included in the documentation. Right, but I'm asking about something more, which is, we can see here clearly the level of complexity in the case of algebraic attacks. But this also points to what could be improved if you think about them as post-quantum symmetrical algorithms. That's where I'm driving at with my question. Now, you mentioned that the annealing time amounted to 20 minutes, which is much more than the coherence time of qubits in a quantum processing unit, which shows that this process may be correct, but in fact it's a classical one. So do you have any evidence that it's a quantum process and not a classical one? Well, it was not only a quantum computer, it was a hybrid one. 20 minutes that you mentioned, this is the annealing time, yes. But the system used a hybrid one. So classical computer would prepare the problem, and some elements then would be used in the quantum computer. But the process of annealing, that has to be a continuous quantum process. Did it take 20 minutes? Or together with other activities? Yes, together with other activities. Okay. The QUBO problem and other optimization problems, they can also be addressed in the case of quantum computers that are based on gates, like VQE and others that were mentioned before. Are you considering that as well? Well, the whole world is dealing with gates, so we wanted to come up with something new. Thank you. Any other questions? Wait a moment. Thank you. I also have 3 questions, in fact. The first one, because I'm not sure if I understood your answer correctly, so please clarify. It's about the key. You can attack either the main key or the developed extended key. So in your attack, you attacked the main one? Yes, the main key. Okay. Question number 2. You mentioned that you had an ASA attack, but you didn't even attack it for half rounds. No, it was just theoretical decision. No, not yet. So you didn't conduct such attacks. It was SAS. I don't know whether you know it. We attacked SAS. Right. And talking about algebraic attacks, the general cost of preparation of equations is one thing. The other is the cost of preparation of the whole system. I understand that the cost of preparing the system is on the wave computer. You can't calculate it, but the cost of building that whole system, have you looked into it? Do you know the level of complexity? Well, linearization is the worst thing because it's polynomial, sorry. So the cost is polynomial, I guess, but I can't give you a more precise answer. Right, thank you. That's enough. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, madam. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so now I will have the pleasure to close today's conference. I thank you very much and have some good lunch. Bon appetit, thank you.